You say you want to change. You say you want a different life. More money, more control, more freedom. But there's a problem, a quiet one, a hidden one, a dangerous one. You don't actually want to change. Not fully, not deeply, because if you did, you would have already started. You would have already moved. You would have already broken the pattern. But you didn't. And that's not because you're lazy. It's not because you don't know what to do. It's not because you don't have time. It's because something deeper is happening, something most people never see. You're attached to who you are, not consciously, but neurologically. Your identity is not just a story, it's a pattern your brain has repeated thousands of times. The way you think, the way you react, the way you see yourself, the way you behave, all of it wired together, connected, reinforced, stabilized over time. And now, it runs automatically, without effort, without awareness. Your brain has created a version of you that feels consistent, predictable, safe. And anything that threatens that version feels wrong, even if it's better, even if it would improve your life, even if it would take you exactly where you want to go. Because your brain is not trying to improve you, it's trying to keep you stable. And stability comes from identity, from repetition, from staying the same. That's why change feels uncomfortable, not because it's hard, because it conflicts with who you think you are. If your identity is, I'm someone who struggles, then success feels unfamiliar, unstable, almost threatening. If your identity is, I'm not disciplined, then discipline feels forced, artificial, temporary, because it doesn't match the pattern. And your brain doesn't like mismatches. It tries to correct them, to bring you back. Back to the version it knows, back to the version it recognizes, back to the version it has reinforced. That's why you sabotage yourself, not consciously, automatically. You start making progress, and then something happens. You hesitate, you delay, you lose momentum, you distract yourself. You break your own pattern of growth and fall back into the old one. And it feels natural, normal, expected, because that's your identity, and your brain protects it at all costs, even if it keeps you stuck, even if it limits you, even if it destroys your potential. Because from your brain's perspective, changing your identity is a threat, not an upgrade. A threat. Because identity is tied to certainty, and certainty equals safety. So when you try to become someone new, your brain resists. It creates friction, internal friction, the kind you can't explain. You just feel it, a heaviness, a hesitation, a subtle pullback, and you interpret it as, this isn't right, this isn't me, I'll do it later. But that's not truth, that's protection, your brain trying to keep your identity intact. That's the addiction, not to comfort, not to habits, to identity, to the familiar version of yourself. Because familiar feels safe, even when it hurts, even when it keeps you in the same place, even when it prevents you from becoming more. That's the paradox. You want change, but you're attached to the version of you that doesn't change. And until you see that, you'll stay stuck. Not because you can't move forward, because something inside you keeps pulling you back. And it doesn't feel like resistance. It feels like you. That's why it's so powerful, because you don't question it. You trust it. You believe it. You think, this is who I am. But it's not. It's what you've repeated over and over until it became automatic, until it became identity. And identity is just a pattern that can be changed, but only if you're willing to break it. Not once, repeatedly, consistently, uncomfortably. Because breaking identity feels like losing yourself. But in reality, it's the only way to find who you could become. What you call yourself is not fixed. It's not stable. It's not permanent. It's a loop, a neurological loop, running in your brain every day, every moment. Without you noticing, your identity is not who you are. It's what you repeat. And repetition creates wiring. Neural pathways, connections, circuits. Every time you think a certain way, your brain reinforces that pathway. Every time you react the same way, it strengthens. Every time you behave in a familiar pattern, it becomes easier, faster, more automatic. Until one day, it runs without effort, without thought, without awareness. That's identity, not a belief, a system, a loop. And here's where it gets dangerous, because your brain doesn't just repeat patterns, it rewards them with dopamine. Dopamine is not just pleasure, it's reinforcement. It's your brain saying, this matters, do this again. And your brain releases dopamine, not only when something feels good, but when something feels familiar. That's the trap. Because familiarity becomes rewarding, even if it's negative, even if it's limiting, even if it keeps you stuck. If something is part of your identity, your brain rewards it automatically. That's why people stay in patterns that hurt them. Overthinking, procrastination, self-doubt, avoidance, even anxiety. Because those patterns are familiar, and familiarity triggers reinforcement. Not because it's good, because it's known. Your brain is addicted to consistency, to predictability, to identity. And dopamine locks that in. Every time you act in alignment with your identity, your brain rewards you, even subtly, even unconsciously. And every time you try to act outside of it, your brain does the opposite. It removes that reward. It creates discomfort, resistance, friction, because it doesn't match the pattern. And your brain doesn't like mismatches. It tries to correct them, to bring you back. Which means it follows the strongest pathways, the most repeated patterns, your identity. That's the loop. Thought, action, reward, reinforcement, stronger identity. Again and again and again, until it becomes dominant, until it becomes automatic, until it feels like this is just who I am. But it's not. It's what your brain learned to repeat and what it learned to reward. That's why willpower doesn't work, because willpower fights the system against your current identity until your brain has no choice but to update, because the brain always adapts, always, but it adapts to what you repeat. Your challenging wiring, dopamine patterns, neural reinforcement, and your brain resists that because it sees it as instability, as risk, as something that breaks consistency. That's why you feel resistance, not randomly, predictably, because your brain is trying to pull you back into the loop, into the familiar, into the identity it knows. And most people follow that pull. They go back again and again and again because it feels easier, because it feels right, because it feels like them. But that's the illusion. You're not choosing, you're following wiring. And that wiring can be changed, but not by thinking differently, by repeating differently, by acting in ways that don't match your identity, again and again, until new pathways form, until new patterns stabilize, until a new identity emerges. But here's the truth most people avoid. The first phase of that process feels wrong, deeply wrong, because you're acting against your wiring, against your identity, against everything your brain has reinforced, and your brain reacts with discomfort, with doubt, with resistance. But that resistance is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're breaking the loop, that you're stepping outside the system, that you're disrupting the pattern. And disruption is the only way change happens. Not gradually, not comfortably, by interrupting what's automatic, by doing what doesn't feel natural, until it becomes natural. That's the rewiring. That's how identity shifts. Not in one moment, in repeated contradiction, against the old pattern, until the old pattern weakens and the new one takes over. That's the real work. Not motivation, not inspiration, repetition. Against your current identity until your brain has no choice but to update, because the brain always adapts, always, but it adapts to what you repeat. Not what you want, not what you say, what you do, consistently. That's what rewires you. That's what rebuilds identity. That's what breaks the loop. And most people never go far enough because they stop at the discomfort. They stop when it feels wrong. They stop when the brain resists, and they go back. Back into the familiar, back into the identity, back into the loop, and nothing changes. But if you push through that phase, if you stay in the discomfort, if you keep repeating the new pattern, something shifts, quietly, gradually, but permanently. Your brain starts to recognize it, to stabilize it, to reward it, and that's when it becomes easier, not because the work changed, because the wiring did. And now, you're no longer fighting your identity, you're becoming a new one. At some point, you have to face it. Not intellectually, not conceptually, directly. The version of you that exists right now is the reason your life looks the way it does. Not the world, not your circumstances, not other people. You. Not who you could be, who you are. Because everything in your life is aligned with your identity. Your habits, your decisions, your reactions, your limits, your patterns. All of it comes from that. So if nothing changes, nothing changes. That's the reality. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because change, real change, requires something most people avoid. You have to break yourself. Not physically, not emotionally, structurally. You have to break the patterns that define who you are. The thoughts you trust, the behaviors you repeat, the reactions that feel automatic. You have to interrupt them, deliberately, consistently, relentlessly, even when it feels wrong, especially when it feels wrong. Because that feeling is your identity resisting. That's your brain saying, this is not who we are. This is not safe. This is not familiar. And if you listen to that voice, you go back into the same loop, back into the same life, back into the same results, again and again and again. That's why most people never change. Not because they can't, because they won't go far enough. They won't break the identity. They try to improve it, adjust it, polish it, but they don't break it. And without breaking it, nothing fundamental changes, because the core stays the same, and the core creates everything else. That's the truth. You don't need a better version of your current self. You need a different one. And different requires destruction of patterns, of assumptions, of automatic reactions, of everything that feels like, this is just me. Because that's the illusion. It's not you. It's what you've repeated, and what you've repeated can be replaced. But only if you stop protecting it. Only if you stop identifying with it. Only if you stop saying, this is who I am, and start seeing, this is what I've been doing. That shift creates space between you and your identity. And in that space, you can choose. Not based on what feels natural, based on what creates change. That's the difference between staying the same and becoming something new. Because becoming something new never feels natural at first. It feels forced, uncomfortable, unstable, like you're acting, like you're not yourself. And that's exactly the point, because you're not. You're stepping outside the old identity, and your brain reacts to that with resistance, with doubt, with everything it can use to pull you back. But if you stay, if you continue, if you repeat the new pattern, even when it feels wrong, something happens. The old identity weakens. Its control fades. Its patterns break. And a new structure begins to form, not instantly, not dramatically, but inevitably, because the brain always adapts to what you repeat. And eventually, what once felt forced becomes natural. What once felt wrong becomes normal. What once felt like not you becomes who you are. That's the rebuild, after the collapse, after the break, after the discomfort. That's where the new identity stabilizes. And with it, a new life. Because identity drives everything. Not your intentions, not your goals, your identity. And when that changes, everything follows. Your behavior, your focus, your perception, your results, all of it, automatically, without force. Because now, it's aligned with who you are. That's the shift, not external, internal, from one identity to another. And the moment you understand that, you stop waiting, you stop hoping, you stop looking for motivation. Because you see the truth. You either break the pattern or you stay the same. There is no middle. There is no slow transition. There is only repetition of the old or the new. And whichever one you choose becomes your life. That's it. That's the system. And now you see it.